It's such an exciting time for all of us to be taking all these projects forward, thanks to the gift from the Amazon Web Services, and it's really great to be here today to talk about them. To begin with, I'd like to make some introductions before we start. I am Professor of Human-Centered Computing at the University of Oxford, and I lead an interdisciplinary research group in the Department of Computer Science. We combine social and computer science approaches to the design of technology. We research methods and approaches for building and evaluating technologies in ways that really try to enhance individual autonomy, well-being, and promote and protect human values. Oliver Tian is the Honorary Council Advisor to the Asia-Pacific Assistive Robotics Association and a founder member of the International Alliance of Robotics Associations, as well as Director in the Global Robotics Clusters Group. He has a background in IT consulting for governments and multinationals across the Asia-Pacific region, and he's a firm believer in industry cross-pollination and a very respected voice in the conversation and deployment of social robots internationally. Dr. Helena Webb is a senior researcher in our team. She has worked on a range of interdisciplinary projects exploring the impacts of innovation. She specializes in applying social science approaches to examine everyday practices in the use of technology and the processes of technological development. And Carolyn Ten Holter is also a researcher in our group, and she is investigating responsible innovation issues that are emerging from quantum computing technologies. So that's the introductions, and we're here today primarily to talk about the two projects that I'm leading through this amazing Oxford-Singapore human-machine collaboration. One is on responsible robots, and the second is on a visionary Responsible Technology Institute. And I'll go into these in a little bit more detail later. The Responsible Robots project is going to look at developing responsible robotics for the digital economy. It'll test the concept of an ethical black box, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. It's going to test the concept of the ethical black box for social robots, and it's going to work with designers and developers to think about how to embed responsible innovation into international technology developers' practices. The Responsible Technology Institute will create an international centre for responsible technology which will draw on existing networks to create a creative and robust community that will discuss and develop more culturally nuanced approaches to responsible innovation that we find very important. We will work with other institutes to provide training and support on responsible technology matters, and we'll continue our groundbreaking work advising policymakers, government and public dialogue on responsible innovation. But first, I'll give a little bit of background on responsible innovation in general. Responsible innovation initiatives across policy, academia and legislation emerged actually about 2 decades ago. It began with an aim to identify and address uncertainties and risks that are associated with novel areas of research. It began in areas like nanotechnology, it moved to the environmental and health sciences, and that kind of includes geoengineering and synthetic biology. The scope of responsible innovation has recently expanded now to include computer science, robotics, informatics, and ICT more generally. Responsible innovation has been defined as doing science and innovation with society and for society, including the involvement of society. And this is very upstream in the process of research and innovation. That is at the point at which the innovation is actually first conceived. And the idea is to align the outcomes of the values of society. Responsible innovation is about anticipating problems, taking into account wider ethical and environmental issues, and being able to create flexible and adaptive systems that deal with these unintended consequences, or what is better known as anticipatory governance. So RI is really then a set of processes for ensuring that innovation benefits society and the environment. It draws on anticipatory governance, where both the potential positive and negative consequences, intended and unintended consequences of an innovation might be anticipated and brought to developers' attention in order to try to influence the trajectory of that innovation. So although there are a number of different frameworks for responsible innovation, several are actually built on 6 pillars, which include ethics, open access, governance, gender equality, science communication, and public engagement. And as an example, really, of responsible innovation in practice, in the UK, here in my group, we have set up an observatory for RI and ICT called Orbit. This is a collaboration between Oxford University and De Montfort University in Leicester. And this is currently funded by one of the UK's research councils as part of an effort to build responsible innovation capacity in the UK. Orbit's purpose is to expand the work of operationalising responsible innovation within UK's academic community. It provides training in RI to doctoral students, but also to academics, to industry, and consults on the UK and European projects while working to build an RI community. Orbit also stresses that it must engage with non-governmental organisations and policymakers, really to widen this conversation about what responsible innovation should be. We'll be continuing this work after the project ends through the creation of a not-for-profit company. And if you'd like to know more about this, about Orbit, the training that we can offer, there's more detail at the end of this slide on the web address. And if you might be interested in taking any of our courses, they are all at the moment delivered online, remotely, and the Orbit team would be happy to discuss ways in which we might collaborate together in the future. So within our Responsible Robots work, we've taken these principles of responsible innovation and created a new definition for responsible robots, which we define as the application of responsible innovation in the design, manufacture, operation, repair, and end-of-life recycling of robots that seeks the most benefit to society and the least harm to the environment. So you can see that what we're trying to do here now is really take on board sustainable development as well. One aspect of the responsible robots that we will expand on in this new project is the concept of an ethical black box to be fitted in all social robots. That is, those that interact on a day-to-day basis with humans, such as autonomous vehicles, care-assisted robots, and children's toys. We argue that accidents are inevitable in social robots. Indeed, they've actually already occurred, though data about these accidents and incidents is very hard to come by. We argue that robots and autonomous systems must be equipped with the equivalent of an aircraft flight data recorder to continuously record sensor and relevant internal status data. And we call this an ethical black box, or EBB, after the black box on aeroplanes. The proposition is very simple, that all robots and some AIs should be equipped by law with a standard device which continuously records a time-stamped log of the internal state of the system. It logs key decisions and sampled output or sensor data, in effect, the robot equivalent of an aircraft flight data recorder. Without such a device, finding out what the robot was doing and why in the moments leading up to an incident is more or less impossible. We argue that an ethical black box then is going to play a key role in the process of discovering why and how a robot caused or contributed to an accident, and therefore it's going to be an essential part of establishing accountability and transparency. And our strongest argument for this EBB is meaningful transparency as a fundamental element of responsibility, the basic ethical principle that it should always be possible to find out why an autonomous system made a particular decision. Without transparency, you cannot have accountability or ultimately trust. But transparency is not a given. It has to be designed into systems. And the EBB is one way of building transparency into autonomous systems. So we're hoping to develop and test these model EBBs in different international settings with different capabilities that match cultural and organizational contexts. This is also a case study then, as I'm sure you can see, in demonstrating the value of responsible innovation in action. And we will also be developing tools and techniques for embedding RI into international technology developers' practices for design. And here are some of the UK supporters for the current UK Responsible Robotics project and the new Responsible Robots programme. We are continuing to draw together complex and detailed proposals for this strategic international programme, and we are looking for more international collaborators to expand this work. That's why it's very exciting to be here today with Oliver Tian and to be discussing his work with the Assistive Robotics Association. We're very much looking forward to working with the association and the International Alliance of Robotics Association itself. The collaboration is certain to add a huge amount of value to our research programme. Thank you very much. So now I'll pass over to Oliver.
Well, thanks very much, Professor Marina. That was a wonderful presentation. In fact, that's exactly what we probably need in the industry. And more importantly, I see that what the work that you're doing can certainly dovetail what the industry needs. Well, a very good afternoon to all of you. It is my pleasure to be here to work with the University of Oxford and to share some of the thinking and thoughts around what the industry is looking for. I would be able to share some ideas of what the industry are concerned about and how we can eventually look at collaborating together to build a common set of programs that we can roll out for the industry to adopt. Now, I guess if we roll back a little bit and look at what's happening out in the industry, besides the robots that are moving around in the factories, social robots are becoming almost a day-to-day life activity. Reports in the media, case studies, organizations that have put together project requests, call for collaboration around how they can work together to bring social robots into the picture, is becoming a daily set of activities. The question is really going to be how we can collaborate to build ethical and responsible use of AI in robotics as the machines get a little bit more intelligent. So there are two things that I believe can be achieved. First of all is to bring together leading universities and industry as well as global organizations to engage on discussions on the responsible use of robotics. Now, this is so key that if we are able to shorten the life cycle between some of the research activities and the practical deployment of those technology, it would help to us to build an even better quality of life. Secondly, we also need to understand that as we start to build a lot of technology into our daily life, we still need a human-centric society. We still need a society that embraces ethical and responsible use. And exactly as what Professor Marina has mentioned earlier, it's not just the creation of the product, it is not just the use of product, but really the entire cycle from the conceptualization to the disposal of the technology. Now, I hope this doesn't happen at the end of the day, right? We are all connected by wires to a robot that tells us what to do. What's important, and when we look at robot technology and how we can use the technology, we really want to see how technology can augment our human ability. There are probably limitations in what we humans can do physically, speed, and otherwise. And that's where technology can supplement our ability. And eventually, if we can move towards helping us and every one of us realize our full human potential, that would be a gift in many ways. But there are questions. There are a number of questions that we all would ask. Can I trust that robot, what it's doing to me? And that's a very important question. In fact, that builds fear. That creates fear in the adoption of robots. Secondly, what would the robot do with all the data it's collected on me? Let's take, for example, a care robot. It would have collected a lot of vital signs information and what I do in my daily life. Would that robot now complain to my caregiver what I did or did not do? That becomes the concern. Will the robot one day become smarter than me? And what does that mean? Is it okay for a machine to be smarter than the human? Or will it ever happen that way? And finally, will there be a time where we humans become servants to the machine? Those are questions which the people in the street are asking today. And because of these concerns, because of the fear of the adoption of such technologies, sometimes we see that the workers sabotage the deployment of robotics because they are not aware, not familiar with what can possibly happen to them when they adopt robotic technology. And I think those questions, those thoughts needs to really have deep discussions. And I look forward to collaboration between the Singapore community and University of Oxford. And if needed to, we can extend it across to the Asia Pacific region to bring together different attitudes, different cultures, different languages, and how we can put together a firm, cohesive, and more importantly, responsive framework for creation of responsible robots. Thank you very much. So Professor Marina, you and your team are doing wonderful jobs in Oxford. We need to figure out how we can share that across the region, potentially look at cross-pollinating the best practices that you have in the UK, and allow the remaining parts of the world, the other countries, participate in some of your programs to look at how best we can create a global framework that supports this. The one question that I would ask, and that could be part of your research, is what are the practical design considerations that you would need to have to build responsible robots?
Well, I think one of the primary ones is, and Helena, I think, will talk more about this. We really need to understand the context in which these robots will be functioning. It's not the case that one thing suits all, and requirements engineering is often, you apply a method and you interact with one user or perhaps even a couple of users, and then you come up with requirements. But really, we want to understand the constellation and the context in which these robots are being deployed, and that will differ. It will be very different if you're looking at a socially assisted robot in a care home, or if you're looking at a robot that's interacting with children. The whole concept will be different. Digital rights, for example, will be different in these contexts. An autonomous vehicle will have a completely different set of issues that need to be considered. So for me, the practical considerations are those early stages where you're really trying to figure out what is the context, the setting, the requirements for this particular domain. That hasn't changed really. Requirements engineering has always done that, but you really need to understand the social and the interactional properties of this. And I think I'll let Helena maybe say a little more there.
Yes, I mean, that's it exactly, that we can sort of go to a certain extent with a kind of one-size-fits-all approach. And in the technical work that we've been doing on Robotics, we've built up an in-house demonstrator of the ethical black box and a set of specifications. But we also need to pass that over, and we're in the process of doing that with our robotics partners, passing that over and asking them to sort of, put it within their own robots and to work through with us the details of how to shape the black box and the specifications for it to the particular context. Because as Marina says, for social robots, you might be using them in various kinds of domains, and the particular requirements for an assistive robot that's used in a hospital might be very different to a driverless car or to a robot toy, and so on. And how the ethical black box will be used, how the robot itself operates, and how we can use that ethical black box in a process of understanding accidents might be very different according to those different domains. So we're also carrying out a great deal of work going into those different kind of contexts and finding out, what are the concerns that users have there, what kind of things do the designers and developers take into consideration when they're building robots for those particular domains as well, and how can we bring together those contextual understandings with those technical ones.
Marina and Oliver, could you perhaps tell us a bit more about how you see these relationships working between academia and industry, and how far you think progress has been made towards actually moving the sort of responsible robotics message and work forward?
Okay, so I'll start. I think from our experience of working with industry, in terms of the Responsible Robotics project, we have the various partners and supporters, such as the Open Bionics, for example. They can see the value of embedding an ethical black box into their particular technologies and their designs moving forward, and they're keen to support that. So that's kind of general way in which our relationship with industry is progressing. In terms of responsible innovation more broadly, I think because of the various issues that have started emerging societally and culturally about AI, lots of tech companies are now beginning to start considering how to embed ethical issues into their organizations. Often these are sort of a very high level, or they'll bring in a panel of ethicists or philosophers or people to try to work out what those ethical issues might be. Whereas actually what we're trying to say on Orbit and in responsible innovation is that this has to go all the way through the business model of the organization, all the way through the life cycle of the development of that technology. And I think this is something that we're beginning to engage with on Orbit. We're starting to have companies coming in, industries coming in, who are more interested in looking at how it impacts on their business model per se, as opposed to having a group of people that sit outside the organizational model advising. Yeah. So that's what I would like to see, that they actually embrace this in terms of their systemic organization, as opposed to having a panel sit outside advising, maybe.
I guess from the industry angle and what we have been trying to do over the past period is the time to market becomes extremely essential. When we discover a problem statement, we need a solution very quickly. And the challenge is when we take that problem statement to the research institutions, we may not be familiar enough with the process. And let's take, for example, the technology readiness level as a discussion, right? TRL. I guess for researchers, you talk about TRL 1 to TRL 9, and you're very familiar at which stage research could happen, right? For the industry, many of times we just needed an answer, and we need an answer fast. Secondly, I guess from an organization perspective, you have the big boys, the tech giants, who probably have sufficient deep pockets to do their own research to find the answers they're looking for. I believe it is the small and medium companies that probably will need help. Their problems that they face may not be large enough to warrant a research interest. But on the other hand, if we can consolidate some of these common problems coming together and define a high-level problem statement, that could warrant sufficient attention. The challenge today is everybody comes to the door and knock and say, I've got a problem, but nobody's putting those problems together in a big jigsaw puzzle and say, aha, that's what we need to achieve.
Yeah.
And that is what the industry really would need, together with the research institution, and that in-between conduit will help to perhaps collect these problem issues, consolidate it, and reclassify into a good enough project that can be worked on. And that's something which, as an association, we try to do with our members, but not good enough. We're trying to do more, and perhaps working with Orbit will give us an opportunity to bridge some of this and allow actual issues to be brought to researchers and get it resolved quickly. Just like the topic I was talking with Helena, right? So I can share with you all those practical issues. We just need to insert it into your master plan so that your research becomes a lot more comprehensive.